The planets have aligned, and once again, with stunning consistency, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast with me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy the asshole.
Woo!
And of course, we do this every week with the sage, Stevie Telavive.
Good evening, gentlemen.
This week we'll be discussing the Nvidia roadmap and the future of AI hardware. We'll also be talking sales and marketing in segment 4 of our entrepreneurial breakdown, and finally tariffs and the stock market Armageddon.
Crashing down round about our ears. Woo!
Okay, well, this is going to be a bumper episode, tons to cover, so I think we'll get right into the docket.
Let's go for it.
I'm going to start with something very technical, but I'm going to do the 3 or 4 minute version of it because it's too technical to, I think, unpack fully on the podcast, but it's too important not to mention either. Mm-hmm. So a couple of weeks ago...
Insomniacs, tune in. This is your cure.
So 2 weeks ago, Nvidia had their GTC conference. It's like the Super Bowl for AI nerds. And Jensen, the CEO, gets up on stage and he talks about all the new hardware that's coming down the line to power the AI revolution. And so he talks about the hardware that got us to this point, which is their Hopper series of chips. And he talks about what's coming, which is the Blackwell series of chips. And they actually do something that's very unusual for big tech companies. They lay out a roadmap that goes all the way out to 2027. Which tech companies have always kind of shied away from. It's always been considered dangerous. Don't show them the thing that's coming in 2 years because it's so much more powerful and so much more capable than the thing they could buy today. They might just wait for 2 years. But obviously with this AI race, nobody's in a position where they can wait. So to take something that was very technical and try and break it down into something that's very simple, there's only 2 or 3 data points that I think are worth mentioning. So one thing they highlighted was the inappropriate use of tokens by most people. So
yes,
you're using ChatGPT, you're using Perplexity, you've got all the bells and whistles switched on, deep research, think. And
everybody's spamming the think and deep research button.
Yeah, you ask some basic question like, what tires does a Porsche Cayenne take? And you don't need all that
20 minutes worth of deep research
to answer that question, right? That's a simple retrieval
task.
Now, he gave an example where on a simple question, a retrieval model would use about 400 to 600 tokens to answer that question. And if you had deep research switched on, then exactly the same question would consume 8,500 tokens, using 20 times more tokens and about 150 times more compute. So it's not just a bit wasteful, it's breathtakingly, stunningly wasteful to turn on deep research if you don't need it. You're generating a ton of tokens. And you should just think about AI data centers as AI factories that produce tokens.
Yeah.
So
the way that Ford produces cars.
Exactly. So I'm just going to cover a few stats here. So one of the things he talked about was the shift from Hopper, which got us to this point, to Blackwell. I'll cut to the very end. Blackwell's about 25 times more, can produce about 25 times more capacity than a Hopper chip.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about incremental improvement, we're talking about exponential improvement.
Yeah.
And so that's just if the Blackwell chips replace the Hopper chips. But the truth is they're already on pace to do 6 to 7 times the production of Blackwell that they ever did on Hopper this year.
Okay.
So there'll be 6 to 7 times more chips, and there'll be more data centers than there's ever been before. They're also scaling on another axis, which is software level scaling. So there's new software called Dynamo that sits on top of the chips and makes sure that the right AI task gets routed to the right model and uses tokens in the most efficient way. When you add all that stuff up, that's how you get to the 25x increase in capacity.
So just to be clear, the end state of this is they remove the buttons altogether for think and deep research because they don't trust people to use them properly.
Yeah.
And the model just knows natively exactly how long to think or how long to deep research or whether just to run a retrieval task depending on whatever query you've put in.
Exactly. And so Blackwell's in the market today. If you're buying AI chips from like December last year onwards, you're basically getting Blackwells delivered. There'll be about 8 million Blackwells delivered before the end of the year. There's already been about 3.6 million delivered so far. So a ton of capacity coming into the marketplace. It's fantastically more capable than the generation that went before. If you look at past 25 and get into 26, you get into things like Blackwell Ultra and Rubin. These are going to be somewhere between 2 and 3.5 times respectively more capable than Blackwell. And then if you look even further into 27, you're looking at Rubin Ultra, which is going to be 14.4 times more capable than Blackwell Ultra.
And Stephen is entirely unimpressed by all of this.
No, I mean, there's two questions that go through my mind. One is why? Mm-hmm. Why does it take so long? Why don't we jump straight to Rubin? So what is there? Is it a learning or a technical gap that we need to cover?
Yeah, I think there's basically different layers of the stack that need to be scaled up. So it's not just about compute, right? Because that super powerful GPU in isolation is useless. What you need to do is stitch 10,000 of them together and see it as one resource. And to do that, you need high bandwidth memory, you need InfiniBand networking. And so all the other layers of the stack need to be able to scale simultaneously with the power of the GPUs multiplying exponentially.
And second question then is, what's going to happen to the cost of the chips? Are we going to start to see the cost of chips collapse as we've always seen? Or is it going to be the same thing, which is new ones are going to be...
You shouldn't think about it in chips.
The new
should be thinking on
be the
tokens.
most expensive.
Well, they think in flops, right? So exaflops. So an exaflop is
a problem we all get with time.
An exaflop
They've got Cialis for that.
It's 1,000 million floating point operations per second is an exaflop. And so capacity is kind of priced at the exaflop level, and then your chip delivers however many exaflops it delivers. So I think the modern chips going forward will actually probably continue to get more and more expensive because the amount of capacity that they're actually providing is exponential. But last year's chip will probably collapse in cost. So who knows? Maybe that ends up in China or Vietnam to power some AI effort there at a fraction of the price of the modern.
So does this really mean that the cost of tokens get driven, the marginal cost of tokens get driven down as close to zero as possible?
So what you're going to see in the next 3 years is a 900x increase in capacity for AI workloads. So almost 1,000% increase in capacity than what we have today. And then what you're going to see on the other axis is the amount of tokens you could produce for $1 today. You'll be able to produce the same amount of tokens in 3 years' time for 0.03 cent.
Wow.
So,
God damn.
Just exponentially increasing in capacity and capability, collapsing in cost at the same time. And so that was a very long way of saying anybody betting against this AI future happening when there's this type of innovation and capacity that's going to flood into the market is totally...
So what is the real competitive metric then?
Well, I know the answer to that one because I've heard all of this before.
Right.
Which is a long story.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's how many tokens can you produce per megawatt hour? Right. That's what it all boils down to, okay? And
so your advantage or disadvantage is going to be your ability to produce cheap power.
That's it. That's going to be the gating factor for
Episode
everybody.
2 of the pod, back to everything comes down to moving forward cost of power. And everything is moving towards... if you think about everything that we're going to be doing in the future, robotics, drones... Everything is effectively power-driven, and the AI to drive it all is power-driven. So if you can't produce cheap power, you are basically screwed in the
You got any
world.
numbers about what we're producing power versus China? Or?
Cost of?
Well, I know the cost of it. I mean, China produces power at 6 cents per kilowatt hour, and we
we're
produce
consuming
power
power
at 30.
at 30. Yeah.
So even if the numbers are 5 for 10% out, the delta is still enormous. Yeah. And so at scale, that adds up to billions or trillions of dollars. Yeah. That delta could be trillions of dollars. And that delta will be the AI factory's margin. That will be their profit margin. They'll be operating. These factories, to make money and be profitable, will operate at razor-thin margins at gigantic scale.
Yeah.
So if your AI factory can produce $12 billion worth of tokens every year, you might make $100 million, $200 million profit on that $12 billion worth of tokens. And if the marginal cost of energy moves 1 or 2 basis points in either direction, that could be your margin gone. Now, tying this all back to previous commentary, this is why I'm so down about the future of the UK, and it's why I'm so down about the future of Europe to participate in this, because we're some of the highest producing energy costs in the world.
And all the policies that we're pursuing just ensure consistently high or potentially even higher energy costs in the future, which is we're not prepared to drill for oil, we're not prepared to frack. We are absolutely held hostage at the altar of environmentalism. Unfortunately.
And we haven't gone nuclear.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening in the world of AI and AI hardware. And for me, reading that, it was definitely, and there's way more detail, which I've bored the guys to death way ahead of time on the podcast. But it was just another holy shit. I mean, there's so much. The model's progression has outpaced the hardware's ability to deliver the results to customers. Yeah. So GPT-5 sitting on the shelf right now, it's waiting on hardware becoming available to run it. They need Blackwell in massive deployment to run it, because every model is about 1,000x, takes about 1,000x more compute to run than the previous model before it.
If you take this up to a macro scale, you're thinking about, why does the West, for example, have living standards ahead of Asia?
Yeah.
And that's because of the industrialization, the industrial power that we built up, the infrastructure. And kind of thinking about what you're saying on that type of macro scale, if we don't have cheap power, if we don't create the power infrastructure, we're going to become the second and third class citizens of the world.
100%.
Because we will have nothing to offer except old industries, old labour. We won't be able to compete at the money-making end of where the future's going.
Stephen, we get so many problems. Let's imagine we could. Let's say the playing field was equal and we could produce the power for 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, here's our next problem. Microsoft last week put its data center projects in the UK on hold because the grid could not guarantee them a new connection.
Wait till you hear this.
Till 2035.
10 fucking years.
Yeah.
2035.
Yeah.
So
a
it's
decade.
not one problem. The problems are just stacking on top of each other. We just don't move at a pace in this country with this government in a way where we can solve these types
and then the
of
bullshit
problems.
fugazi stories that come out, we've engaged Anthropic in a white paper consultation about injecting AI into every vein of the government organisation.
Yeah.
We'll come on to the other side of moving too fast towards the end, I'm sure.
Rant over.
So that's all things AI this week. But I thought it was worth mentioning because I think it just brings into stark contrast for people, like, the amount of compute coming online in the next 3 years is utterly astonishing and is effectively the black fiber revolution for the internet. And it will give birth to things we can't even imagine right now. Anyway, AI done.
Pack your shit up and move to China.
We're moving on to sales and marketing. So let's just recap where we got to. So in week 1, we talked about mindsets, we talked about characteristics, we talked about disqualifying characteristics. We then talked about how do you produce the idea? How do you test it with friends and family? Then how do you go find a market for your idea and all the different ways to do that? And then finally, once you've satisfied all that set of criteria, go write a business plan before you start trying to execute on your business. So that kind of brings us up to date. So this week is the real meat and potatoes of business. It's sales and it's marketing. And I think this is where our audience was desperate for us to get to. I think they found the last 3 or 4 quite tedious. Come on, how do we get to the good stuff? How do I find customers and sell the product? Well, we're now here. And so, of course, to lead us in this conversation about marketing, we're going to turn it over to Andy the Asshole, the marketing expert here on the Roundtable Rethink podcast. Get us every week on Apple, Spotify, and at the roundtablerethink.com.
That was my bit.
You just saved Stephen his begging pitch at the end of the show, God damn it.
So, Andy, take us into the marketing side of it, and then I'll pick up some stuff on the sales.
Right, let's shift gears and talk about something every business builder and startup entrepreneur has to master, which is, of course, lead gen and customer acquisition, my personal favourite subject. So before we dive into the practical tactics here, I want to take a second to set the stage out. So my company has sold over £25 million worth of live entertainment, and I'll be totally honest with you, none of what I'm about to share here is secret sauce or proprietary information. Everything that I've ever learned about lead generation has come from studying and adapting ideas from other successful entrepreneurs that I look up to and admire. So I really just want to make it perfectly clear that what I'm sharing today is definitely not mine's, but I do use it and it does work. And like anything in business, some people will run with this and crush. Other people will do nothing with it. And like most things in life, it really just comes down to your ability to execute. So we're not promising anybody anything here.
Nope.
We're really just breaking down what's worked for me. So when I was prepping for this episode, again, I was in a bit of a crisis, just no idea at what level to pitch this because of the kind of plurality of our audience. And I just kept coming back and asking myself this question, which is, what is the simplest, clearest way to explain lead gen that will make sense whether you're a brand new business or somebody that's already making sales? And I kept coming back to a framework that I've used in my own business extensively, which is Alex Hormozi's Core 4 methodology. And here's what I love about it. Number one, it's simple, it's effective, and the most important thing, it's really actionable regardless of your level of ability or sophistication. So before I unpack exactly what that is and all the component parts of it, I really just want to cover off a couple of things that you need to have in place before you even think about getting leads. And there's two things. First of all, I want you to take some time before you start and track your key conversions. So setting up tracking for the most important conversions in your business. These will be the obvious things: leads, purchases, maybe even, a call or something booked with your sales team. Spoiler alert, you're probably going to need some technical expertise to help you with this. So just go through the fire, go through the pain, and get that done, because it'll actually stand you in good stead when you try to scale this stuff in the future. The second thing that I want you to do is set up a fucking CRM. Don't be that guy walking about with your business in your head, or God forbid, on a spreadsheet or a Google Doc. Use a proper CRM. You can get into, you got HubSpot and Zoho and go high level. These things are fabulously capable. You can get into them for 5, 10, 15, 20 quid a month. And you really want to get into good habits early doors of tracking and recording your contacts, your leads, your opportunities, and your sales. These are really good practices to get into straight out the gate. So I'm going to assume at this point that you're tracking your key conversions, that you've got HubSpot set up, configured, and ready to go. And now we can start going about the process of getting leads by breaking down Hormozi's Core 4. So at its heart, the Core 4 is built round about two simple questions: who are you talking to, and how are you talking to them? So the great thing about business is you're only ever talking to two people. You're either talking to people who know you, and for the rest of this segment, we're going to refer to them as your warm audience. So they are friends, family, followers, past clients, etc. Or you're going to be talking to people who don't know you, aka your cold audience. And these could be strangers. These could be guys where you've maybe purchased a contact list, you maybe have paid to get access to somebody else's audience. And you're only ever going to be communicating with them in one of two ways. So you're either going to be communicating one-to-one, so think personal contact, like a personal email, personal phone call, DM, text message, or you're going to be talking to them one-to-many, so think more kind of public announcements, so social media posts,
Email blast.
emails, podcasts, email blasts. And when you combine this kind of 2x2 matrix, you get the core 4 ways of generating leads for any business, which breaks down into warm outreach, posting free content, cold outreach, and running paid ads. So we're going to go ahead now and break these down one at a time, starting with warm outreach. So why do we start with this? Because this is the easiest, cheapest, and fastest way to get your first 5 customers. So remember, what I've got in mind here is a startup entrepreneur. Every example that I'm going to use in this, I've picked a real local services business. So you come up with the anecdote of power washing last week. So every example that I give you as we go through this process is essentially going to be for a power washing business. And the reason that we start with warm outreach is it's direct one-to-one communication with people who already know you. So obviously we've identified who they are: friends, family, past clients, etc. And the reason that we're going to start with them is because you have a contact with them and they're in your phone somehow. You essentially have kind of tacit permission to contact them, so it's less intrusive. And you're reaching out intentionally instead of waiting around hoping that they magically remember who you are and what you do. And so Hormozy calls this the kind of inner circle, and it's the best place to start. And the reason we start here is because, number one, it's free. What do all startup entrepreneurs have in common?
They're broke.
They're broke. So no money, no ads, no software required. It's fast. You can literally start it today after this podcast. You can go ahead and get cracking. And it's low resistance. These people already know who you are, and they know a bit about you, and they trust you. So we're going to start off with, how do we build a list? Who do we reach out to? So the great thing is, you already have a ready-made list of leads. It's in your pocket right now. It's your phone. And what you basically do to start with this is, you open up your phone, you click contacts. Most people will have hundreds. Some people have thousands in there. And voila, you have a ready-made list of leads that you can start reaching out to for opportunities. But we don't want to be a blunt instrument. There needs to be a wee bit of sophistication to how we do that. So the next question you need to ask is, what platform do we use? Well, the answer is you use all the platforms. So we're going to hit them all eventually. But the Core 4 system suggests that you start with a platform in your phone that you have the most contacts in. So let's just say, for the sake of making the point, let's just say it's WhatsApp, and you've got 500 contacts in your WhatsApp account. So how do you reach out to them, and what do you send them? Now, Hormozy's got a really interesting framework for this. It's called the ACA framework: acknowledge, compliment, and ask. Now, the great thing about this framework, as I was going through it, it's not just a brilliant framework for generating leads and opportunities. It's actually just a brilliant framework for communicating with anybody about anything. It's just a great framework to live your life.
A good life skill.
Yeah. And so at this point, we could be very natural about how we reach out, right? We're not asking for anything at this point. We're not asking them to buy anything or do any business with us. All we're really trying to do is authentically connect with the contacts in our phone at this point using ACA. So I'll give you an example of how that uses. So A is acknowledge. So you need to find out something about them before you reach out. And the obvious place to do that is social media, right? So go and find out, see that we've been up to recently on social media. And we'll use the fictitious character of Jamie, who's one of our contacts. So your acknowledge, your A for acknowledge could sound something like, hey, Jamie, just saw pictures of your new garden furniture. Looks amazing, proper summer vibes. And then C would be your compliment. So you would then follow up by saying, you've always been great at making your garden look sharp. So you want to make that genuine. You don't want to give somebody some kind of empty flattery. The compliment has to be a genuine, authentic compliment. And then the great thing about the ask is you can start moving them towards the subject matter and the topic that you eventually want to land on at the end. So you could say something like, does it take a lot of time for you to keep on top of that? And then what you do is, that's one message sent, personalized to your WhatsApp contact, and then you repeat the same process 50 times a day until you start getting the responses. And so when they respond, what do? You be a normal fucking human being, and you don't be a weirdo. Remember, at this point, we're just connecting with them. We're not pitching them anything. So once you've went through the appropriate amount of conversation, or maybe 3 or 4 text exchanges where you've looked on the ACA process, you start moving them towards a kind of soft ask, not a kind of hard sales pitch. So an example of how that might work. So you've done your ACA a few times, the conversation's flowing nice, and then you drop in there, hey, Jamie, I was just thinking, I've just started offering power washing locally, driveways, patios, decking. I'm looking to book in the first few clients at a huge discount to get some content and reviews on the board. Do you know anyone that might be interested? Now, there's a huge unlock here, because you're not asking them to buy anything direct, which is really disarming. What you're really asking is if they know anybody, and that does a couple of things at once. It makes it really easy for them to come forward if they're interested, and it makes it way less awkward for them to back out if they're not. And the second thing that it does is you're also tapping into their network and potentially getting the access to their warm audience as well. So there's a kind of network effect that plays out here. You're essentially killing 2 birds with a 1 stone.
I think it's what we've also all realised over time. No one likes being sold to.
No.
Yeah.
So the only way to sell is to effectively help.
Yeah.
And unless you unless there's a genuine heartfelt connection, actually people are just immediately turned off.
Yeah.
100%.
Totally.
So send 50 of them a day, let the replies come in, and as sure as the sun comes up tomorrow, the replies will come in if you use that framework, and then reconnect authentically, and then when you feel the timing's right, move them towards using that ACA framework, use them towards the soft ask as opposed to a hard pitch. And then when you've exhausted the 500 contacts on WhatsApp, what do? You go right back to the fucking beginning again, and you start on your Messenger account, then you start on your text account and every other platform that you've got on your phone, and you go through that process again. And so the takeaway here is you're really just reconnecting, starting a conversation, identifying if there's any interest, offering help, insight, or asking for a referral. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. And if you do that, as sure as the sun comes up tomorrow, once you've rattled through 500 contacts on your phone, I reckon you'll have enough quality contacts in there, quality conversations, and asking nicely for referrals to get your first 5 to 10 customers on the board. And free or heavily discounted is a great way to get off the mark with that, because you're just taking a lot of the friction down on it. So before we move on from warm audience, is there anything else that you think needs to be touched on there? Or have you got any anecdotes for your own personal story as to if warm audience back in the day ever worked for you? Was that a strategy any you've ever used 100%. Yourself?
100%. It's how I got all my first clients. You know, I was on the board of different organizations, and all my first clients were friends and not family, because I didn't really have any family in the business, but they were certainly all friends and acquaintances. And it was, hey, listen, we got this thing. We think it's really cool. If you like it, I'm going to give it to you. If you think it provides value to the business, then I want you to pay me for it in 3 months' time. And if you don't find it valuable at all, absolutely fine. We've learned something, and we'll part company good buddies. And I'd say our first 10, 15 customers came from that kind of warm outreach to people we already knew in the space. But it was a very disarming, no pressure thing. It was like, I don't even want any money for it. Just take it. And the feedback's going to be valuable to me.
And the whole do you know anybody who, you think you could use is a really disarming way to get that message across. And by the way, as you start picking up your first couple of sales, you want to go from free to heavily discounted to properly charging for it.
Yeah,
of course.
The only thing I would say was the same thing, slightly different. I remember having no connections, young solicitor, just starting, and going to 2 or 3 family friends who were in the industries that I was interested and involved in, saying, who do you know?
Yeah.
Please, can you help me? Who do you know that you could just give me a warm introduction to? Same thing.
Brilliant.
I think there's a danger that entrepreneurs skip this step because they seem vulnerable in front of their friends or their peers, or they don't want to feel like they're begging or asking. And so I would say drop the ego.
Yeah, drop the ego.
Yeah. Drop the ego. It's the lowest, cheapest hanging fruit that you've got available to you. Go leverage it. There'll be time for ego when you've got 1,000 customers and a bank full of money.
100%.
And if no one wants to buy your product because it's overpriced, isn't required, the wrong fit, it tells you a message really early on and really cheaply.
Yeah.
Everything's a signal at this point.
100%.
Everything's a signal. Yeah. So have the antenna up at all times, right? So if you're talking to all your network and they're not taking you up on that offer, then there's obviously something up with the offer or the outreach. And that's a signal. It doesn't mean pack the whole thing in and go home. It's just a signal. Take the signal on board, readjust, go again until you figure out something that works.
Yeah. So we'll assume that you've done all of that. You've got your first 5, 10 customers on the board. You're now looking to scale. So it's time to move on from warm outreach. You've exhausted that channel now. And now we're moving on to module 2, which is posting free content. And if you go back to the matrix that I spoke about at the start of this, so the matrix here is one-to-many communication with your warm audience. And so what it is we're going to be creating and sharing valuable ideas publicly to build trust, visibility, and interest through the form of social media posts, videos, stories, email, blogs, God forbid, podcasts. You're not selling at this point. You're showing, you're not chasing, you're attracting. It's a completely different form of selling. And over time, it becomes a magnet for leads who already know, like, and trust you before they even speak to you. Now, why does this work and why is it effective? Because it's scalable. So we all know that the right posts, one right post can reach thousands of contacts. It's timeless. Some posts live forever on, SEO and YouTube and vlogs. It's asymmetric. An hour of effort can produce value for years, and it's low cost. You're not trading any physical cash right now. You're just trading more of your time for money. I'll just give you a quick anecdote in that. When we started on TikTok 2 years ago, the first load of videos that we put up, one of them was for one of our bands, VH5, and it got 190,000 views in a 36-hour period and generated 41 bookings on the site for them. And it literally took 5 minutes to put up along with the post that I did for the rest of that day. So anytime you do this, you just always run the risk of getting a breakout post that really...
I think the other thing which I've always, and I say this to students, because what you're talking about now, I see a lot in the legal market. The easiest way to become an expert, to be acknowledged an expert, just start telling people, I'm an expert. Do a podcast on AI.
What we've done about...
and fake it till you make it.
Yeah, or not even fake it, just, not enough people will go out there and take that risk and put themselves out there to be questioned and criticised. So if you're going out there and talking about a subject, the chances are you'll start to be acknowledged as someone in the know.
Yeah, exactly. So Hormozy comes up with this, again, he's very into framework, so he's got a great framework for creating really good content, and the one that he uses all the time that transfers to any piece of content is the hook, retain, reward framework. So hook, you've got to stop somebody from scrolling past your post. So any piece of content that you create, the first 1 to 3 seconds has to grab their attention. 2, you've got to retain them. You've got to hold their attention. So the content has to be snappy, visually appealing, structured and logical. And 3, you need to reward their attention. You need to deliver some value at the end of the video. So you need to leave them better than you found them. And that means teaching them something, maybe challenging a belief, or providing a tool or an insight that they can take away and think about. And you can even drop a wee cheeky CTA in there if you want. Where do you post these videos? Well, if it's video first, you can post on platforms like TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts. If it's written content, you can post on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook groups. And if it's long form content, you really want to leverage platforms like YouTube, blogging, and podcasting. So what do you talk about? How do you create these content buckets? How do you know what to talk about? Well, again, framework for 4 things you can talk about. So you can either teach somebody something. So that's you sharing what you know. So for example, how to clean oil stains off your concrete in the power washing scenario. You can either show somebody something. So you're demonstrating results before or after kind of power washing videos. Or you can relate to people, you can be human and real. So the video could be what I learned from cleaning 100 driveways. Or you can sell something, so like a soft CT, a soft call to action or a promo. Want your driveway to look like this? Insert video here, DM me, shine, and I'll get back in touch. So here's some good examples of kind of hooks and stuff for a power washing business. So if you're creating a video on TikTok Reels, you could say, watch me bring this mossy driveway back to life. And then the video would be a before or after time lapse with like trending audio. You could do a Facebook or a LinkedIn post. You could say, did you know a power wash drive can boost your curb appeal and resale value of your house? I've been working with homeowners in Ayrshire to bring their homes back to life one stone at a time. Or if you wanted a story or an email, the final example is you could say, client this week had 3 years of grime in their patio. 45 minutes later, it looked like new. If you're in Ayrshire and want the same, reply clean and I'll get in touch with you and we'll book in an appointment. And what happens over time? You become a subject matter expert in that area. People start reaching out to you. You build reputation as you go. And the warm leads come in pre-sold because they're so used to seeing you and they feel like they know you a bit better and they know more about your product or service. And ultimately that leads to more leverage, better conversations, and a higher conversion rate. So the action steps on this one to finish off episode 2 or module 2, pick your platform, post 3 times a week minimum. Doesn't have to be perfect, just start somewhere. Use the hook, retain, reward formula in terms of how to build your content. Rotate through teach, show, relate, and sell, and keep going for 90 days and see what happens. Consistency is key. So do any of you want to add anything on that? Any of you guys running content at the moment for anything you do? Have you tried that strategy before?
No, I think the strategies are solid. I think there's differences between B2B and B2C. And I know in this example, we're using a power washing business. B2B is hard because buyers of things don't necessarily hang out in the platform. So I guess the question would be, does a lot of this stuff apply to B2B, and where B2B buyers hang out, like LinkedIn? Can you, like, does all the same rules apply, or is it just same rules apply?
And unfortunately, when you're unpacking something like this, you have to pick an example, because you can't you can't unpack every example. But a B2B all the B2B examples work perfectly well. You would just change things like the platform. So by the way, a lot of business owners hang out on Facebook, and they're targetable, and you can find them on there. But of course, as we all know, being business guys ourselves, the real place to play for B2B sales is in LinkedIn.
I think going back to previous discussions on the entrepreneurial journey, and you kind of touched on it, but maybe didn't specify it, but a lot of the content also touches on what is the pain point. Keep reminding people of the pain point. Because, people, I see it a lot with legal stuff. People like to talk about process. No one cares about process. No one cares about how you get your driveway clean. What they want to know is, I have here's a problem. Yeah. Here's a solution to it.
And we actually touch a wee bit on this in Module 3, which is cold outreach, which I'm coming on to just now. So we've covered warm outreach, we've covered creating free content, and we're on Module 3 now, which is cold outreach. So this is where you don't wait for leads, you just go and actively get them. So you take the result into your own hands. You're not dependent on the algorithm or anything else kind of throwing you off. So what is this? Cold outreach, again, getting back to the matrix, is direct one-to-one communication with strangers this time. So you're reaching out to people who haven't given you permission, don't know you, and probably weren't expecting to hear from you. As the first 15 years of our career will suffice, handing out catalogues in industrial estate for stationery, ruining everybody's fucking day that we came into contact with.
I don't know if it was 15 years, but it was definitely a long time.
Yeah.
It was years.
So this is the hardest quadrant to master, but it's also the most repeatable and scalable once you nail it. And Hormozy says that when you get good at cold outreach, you no longer rely on the luck of algorithms. You're in full control of your lead flow. Now, why does this work? Because it's direct. There's no need to go viral or wait for organic growth to kick in. It's measurable. You know exactly what's working, and it's scalable. Once it works, you can automate and hire against it. And it builds resilience. You learn to sell under pressure, which, as we all know firsthand, is a very valuable skill to have. So step one, how do you build a list of strangers to reach out to? Well, you buy them, you scrape them, or you curate them yourself, right? And I think everybody knows what that means. There's tons of list brokers you can buy from. With all these AI tools available now, you can go and get a scraper to go and get a list for you, or you can manually curate a list of companies that...
And the tactics change depending on the industry you're in. If you're in a consumer business, then, you can buy lists of names. If you're in a B2B business, then most industries have trade associations, buying groups, governing 100%. Bodies, and they've got lists of people. So you have to be kind of resourceful about how you source that information, but it is out there for sure.
100%. So the most important thing is you need to match it with your ideal client profile before you do anything. So you need to identify who that is. And then that is the various different methods of going and actually pulling together these lists. So step 2 here is message strategy. Be relevant, be human. So what we're doing is, in the way that we reach out to these guys, it's quite similar to warm outreach. We're personalizing every message. So we're not talking about spam email here where you're sending 10,000 emails. We're still going to email and contact these guys one person at a time. So it's one-to-one communication to strangers. Now, an example of how you could personalize a message to them. So we want to keep it short, 3 to 5 lines max, make it about them. And as we do in our warm outreach, it's a soft ask. It's not a hard pitch. So an example for a power washing business would be, hey, Steve, saw your pub terrace on Google Maps. Love the space. I run a local power washing business and noticed the slabs could use a refresh. Want me to pop by and give you a quick no pressure quote? And then what you want to do is take a variation of that and personalize the first line of each message and do 50 to 100 of them a day as well. So again, it's a good entry level, and you're not doing these horrible cold calls where you're kind of hitting them over the head and basically engineering these confrontations. It's quite a light way to get involved in that whole way of selling. So what you're trying to avoid is mass spam blast with zero personalization, over-explaining your service in the first message, something that businesses are very bad for.
Because what's the goal at this point? It's only to get somebody to engage.
We're
not trying to sell them into 100%. This point. It's just will somebody take the time to respond
and I think that's
engage?
Yeah, I think that's the thing I remember learning a long time ago. You never sell, you just get them to the next stage.
Yeah.
It's always moving to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage.
And that's it. So the only goal is to start a conversation, identify an interest, and move them to the next step, which might be getting a quote or booking in a call or whatever. So the action steps: define your ideal client, build a list of 50 to 100 cold contacts, write 3 message templates using personalization, send 10 DMs or emails a day, and track every reply and follow up. And that brings us to the end of our cold outreach one, and we only have one more module to go. Anything you want to touch on in cold outreach before we move on to the final module?
Controversially, I still think cold calling works if it's done properly, but it is the least
enjoyable
for the people doing it and for the people receiving them. But if it's done right, it's still effective at generating leads.
And I think there's also something about human resilience, which is, unfortunately, you have to get your brain into space where not hearing anything back in 95 to 99% of these is not
normal.
It's normal, and it's not no. It's just, I'm not ready to talk to you yet. So you have to kind of reprogram how you deal with that silence.
Yeah. And so that takes us on to the final module of the core 4, which is running paid ads. And what we're trying to do here is amplify what's working, not figure out what's broken. So paid ads are when you pay to reach a cold audience at scale. So that's one to many strangers in terms of the matrix that we go back to always with the core 4. We're using platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Google Search, TikTok, and Snap. One to many cold audience marketing, very powerful when done right, but you need to get all your messaging validated and locked in and core offers working before you do this, because this is the one that's expensive and can actually be brutal if you don't have those fundamentals in place. And this is why, as we go through the core 4, we get to this one last. Until you're doing the first 3, you shouldn't be doing the 4th one. So this works because it's scalable. You can reach thousands of people instantly. You get really fast feedback loops when you're testing offers, hooks, and audiences really quickly. It's trackable. The data lets you optimize and refine, and it's hands-off. Once you get it dialed in, you can automate your lead flow, but it is expensive, particularly if you're guessing. So when should you start running ads? You should already have validated your offer, know your ideal customer, understand your key message, and be able to close sales predictably and have a way to fulfill demand at scale. And if you're still experimenting with any of that, stick to warm outreach and creating free content and get that really dialed in before you move on to running ads. So what makes a good ad creative? So Hormozi's tips here are: start with a pain point. Stephen, you touched on it a minute ago. Use pattern interrupts, so like weird visuals, bold statements, open loops. Keep it really impactful, the content. Use testimonials or results, because we know social proof sells. And keep it short, particularly on TikTok and Instagram. And then split test aggressively. You've got to split test out headlines, hooks, visuals, and CTAs. And again, here's a hook. I cleaned this driveway in 18 minutes and the results shocked the owner. So that would be a perfectly excellent hook to put in your paid ads video for a driveway cleaning business. How to get started even on a small budget. So the platforms are Facebook, Instagram, YouTube's local ads. We want to start with a $10 to $20 a day budget. One offer, three ad variations, one local and one narrow targeting. And we can use tools to create these ads like Canva and CapCut and all that stuff, depending on whether it's videos or whether it's images that you're running. And a good example here to finish with, again, if you were running local business ads for power washing, a strategy could be, Ayrshire homeowners, your patio doesn't need to look like that, and it could be a picture of a fucking shitty patio. We restore driveways, patios, and walls to their original beauty, usually in under an hour. Book now and get 20% off your first clean, but only for this month. And then you'd have a before or after video, a testimonial quote, and a CTA at the end. Book your free quote targeting. And so book your free quote now. And to finish this very last point is, in terms of your targeting, you'd want to put a geo radius around your service area. So if we were doing a local ad, we'd be running it in Ayrshire. So in the ads manager, you would put a ring round about Ayrshire, and that would basically isolate everybody in that area. And then you could pick secondary targeting within that. You could pick homeowners or people over 30. And then you could have optional interest layers like home improvements, landscaping, gardening, etc. And so your action steps for that to finish are only run ads after warm content and cold outreach have worked. Pick one clear offer to promote. Make 2 to 3 ad creatives with different hooks. Set up simple lead capture and automation. Spend 10 to 20 quid a day. Test and track the results locally.
So there's only one thing I would add to that, which is the ad tools like Facebook Ad Manager and Google Ad Manager are as deep as the ocean, and they're almost at the point now where they're not really discoverable by normal people. So would you recommend people just go down the rabbit hole, type Google Ad Manager for beginners and try and walk their way through it? Or would you recommend that they try and find a budget to work alongside somebody?
No, I think for Google AdWords, that definitely is a science, and there's loads of science involved in that. I wouldn't try getting involved in Google AdWords yourself, but in terms of the social platforms like Meta in particular, it's pretty WYSIWYG once you actually get into it.
Right.
And in terms of, so if you're doing something really super competitive, like I'm trying to think of a good example here, like a highly competitive commoditized product that you're selling where you need to just squeeze every last bit of efficiency out of the ad, then you probably need to work alongside an agency, but that costs money. But if you're running ads for local services, absolutely not. It took me 10 minutes to show Lee's wee brother how to log in, use the ad manager and set up a basic campaign for his bathroom and kitchens company.
And the old rule applies. If you're struggling with knowledge or you don't know how something works, type that thing for beginners into YouTube and just follow a tutorial.
How to set up a bathroom ad on Facebook Ads Manager.
But steps 1, 2, 3 will have taught you the things that work, the things that resonate. And then by the time you get to the ad step and spending money step,
you're deploying content.
You should have taken a lot of the learnings for step 1 through 3 into step 4.
You're deploying winning content that already objectively works.
Yeah. And effectively what you've done
scaling that up.
You've taken a lot of the risk out of it because, as you say, by that point, you're not shooting in the dark. You've got something which you know people want. So you're really just trying to optimize. And ultimately, once you start to, because the thing we haven't really touched on, it's probably not for today, but cost of acquisition. Once you understand how many people you get per spent ad, then effectively
you can start. It's an arbitrage, and you can start scaling up from there. But that Core 4 works. It's literally all I use. Now there's a wee bit more. You can go another level deeper and talk about affiliates and other lead getters and all that kind of stuff. But again, that's a conversation for another day. This is something that everybody can understand and deploy. It's literally 99% of what I've used to generate £25 million worth of live entertainment sales. And so you can scale a 7 or 8 figure business just using the Core 4.
Yeah.
So, and back to Stephen's point, and I think we mentioned this on the business planning episode, like whatever gross margin you think you're going to need, double it and you might get close. Customers are not free.
Nope.
Acquiring customers costs a bunch of money. And the bigger you get, that will be a much bigger percentage of your revenue. So just bear that in mind. Never get into business with the assumption that the acquisition of customers is free. You're going to need a budget to find customers.
100%.
So you followed Andy the asshole's advice. You've now got a steady trickle of leads coming into the business. But depending on the type of business you're in, you might have to get on the phone and sell that person on why they should use your product or service. So that nicely transitions us out of lead generation, which is everything we've talked about so far,
to follow up in sales.
So the one thing that we've not talked about at all is how do you actually sell? And so, Stephen, if, God forbid, you should trip walking out the door of the cyber cave tonight and split your head on the deck and had a terrible brain injury, I'm trying to work out how much more diabolical I can make this.
Dumb ways to die.
Would you want me to go, mate, an ambulance is going to take 4 hours. Let me go and get the spaghetti lifter and I'll have a go at this myself?
No.
AKA performing surgery on your brain.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Why?
Because you don't have the necessary skill sets.
Because I don't know shit about brain surgery,
exactly.
right? But here's the problem. There's no barrier to entry to sales.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my contention that you cannot be a salesperson because it says salesperson on your business card. You've got to go and learn how to be a salesperson.
Yeah.
Because there are methodologies to sales. There's a way to sell. And if you're really lucky, like me, when you were 21 years old, you will have a great boss who sent you to an in-house residential sales training course in Los Angeles called MaxAx.
MaxAx.
And you will come back feeling like you just were shown the secrets of the universe. Because once you learn how to sell and persuade and convince people to part with money, it feels like a cheat code for life. And it's not just a skill for selling, it's a life skill. Because if you actually think about it, you are selling all the time. And kids actually innately know this when they're young. They forget it in their late teens and then they have to go and learn it again in their 20s and 30s. But kids know how to sell you on everything. They're unbelievably persistent. They're unbelievably resilient to rejection. They keep pounding on you and they keep finding new and interesting angles for why you should give in to the thing they're asking you for.
I know this to be true as my daughter did her PowerPoint presentation as to why we should get a cat.
Yeah.
You know, you're selling your wife
why she should sleep with you for the second time this year.
On why you need that new iPad when the one that you've got in the drawer works perfectly well. So you're selling constantly and all the time. Now, depending on the industry you're in, there are certain sales methodologies that lend themselves really well. I learned a methodology called MaxAx, and it was based on the 7 steps to selling. And it started with the approach, qualification, agreement on need, sell the company, fill the need, close the sale, and cement the deal, and all the transition steps in between. Now, you've got to go and learn the theory of being a salesperson, just like you've got to go and learn the theory of being a brain surgeon.
Or a lawyer.
But the good brain surgeons or the good lawyers, the doing part is every bit or even more important than the theory.
Exactly.
Okay, so you could go and do a sales training course like MaxAx or Challenger or Medic or any of the other 50 different variations of the same thing that are out there. But unless you go and then knock 50 doors or do 50 sales presentations, you're still going to suck at sales. Now, here's the key thing about sales. If done properly, it never ever sounds like you're trying to sell anybody in it. And it just sounds like a nice conversation. Mm-hmm. The best salesperson I ever worked with, and the guy who sent me to Los Angeles, to this day, I've never worked with a better salesman, was a guy called Doug McLean. And Doug and I would walk into appointments and we would just seem to have nice conversations with people who increasingly liked us as the conversation went on. And then witchcraft would happen and Doug would leave with a signed contract.
A purchase order. Yeah.
And I could never understand what the fuck was going on. I just knew we were having lovely conversations and leaving with contracts at the end of them, but never once did I feel like we were selling them in. And in the end, most people were begging to buy rather than being forced to sell. And it at the time, it seemed like black magic until I realized what was actually going on by going to the MaxAx course and seeing how the process worked. But there's a science, which is the methodology, but the art is how you then apply the science.
100%.
How do you deliver it? How do you make it sound like a nice, cool conversation?
And I think the other thing which you've kind of touched on, you've both laid it out, it is repetition. It's like any other skill, whether it's hitting a golf ball, whether it is, and some people are naturally good at golf. Some people could be great with the right training. Some people could be a lot better with practice. Yeah. And I think the reality of all of it is it's 1,000 repetitions. You got to do it 1,000 times.
And actually, a lot of it is EQ. A lot of it is just about your ability to connect with other human beings in a short period of time.
People buy people. Yeah. People buy results.
100%.
Yeah. So if you've got a wee bit of structure behind you and a wee bit of strategy behind you, but you just naturally and effortlessly connect with people quickly and deeply, that's kind of the winning formula for sales.
So here's the cheat code for sales. Great salespeople shut the fuck up
and listen.
Ask tons of questions and then listen very carefully to the answer. Unsophisticated people think, you ever heard that person say, oh, he's a great salesman, he's got the gift of the gab? like the cheesy, the classic second-hand car salesman, the motor mouth who comes out the sales office and tries
20-minute monologue without drawing breath.
asking you insincere questions about your kids and glazing over when you answer. Like, this is the quintessential terrible salesperson. The gift of the gab, the motor mouth, pitching you on a product he doesn't even know if you need or want. And so great salespeople ask fantastic questions. So let's just cover that, because this really is the crux of sales. Qualification is basically where the sale is either lost or where it's won.
100%.
And so what is qualification? Qualification is where you ask open-ended questions which forces the prospect to talk about their problem so that you can gather enough information to figure out if your product or service is a good fit as a solution for their problem. Now, there's multiple types of open-ended questions. There's fact-finding open-ended questions, and then there's feeling-finding open-ended questions, and you've got to ask both types. And so when you've done that enough, when you've asked enough questions and you've gathered enough data, you will now have everything you need. Here's the unbelievable things about sales. See, if you just ask people fucking questions, they'll tell you everything you need to know in order to sell and close them. But most people never get to asking the questions. They show up and throw up with their sales pitch without having really, truly taken the time to understand.
And Paddy,
the
it's unfortunately, it's even worse than that. It's not even about asking the questions. It's about getting the answers.
Listening to the answers. There's
No,
probably
getting
one-
the answers. Some people will not dig in enough to actually get the answer out of somebody. So they go, so what's your problem here? What brought you here today? And they go, oh, no, I'm just out for a walk.
Yeah.
And they'll go, all right. Instead of going, you really just come out here for a walk today? Do you know what I mean? Like actually getting the answers is a clever bit.
There's one question I sometimes sit down with people and ask them before they even start. Do you believe that your company's product is the best fit for your clients? Do you really believe in the product you're selling? And if the answer is no, and somebody, or I speak to students and they laugh and they giggle, they go, no.
Yeah.
If you don't actually believe that you're the best fit for your clients,
Walk away.
You
If it's
shouldn't be
not a
here.
hell yeah,
You're
it's
not
a hell no.
You're not in the right place.
It's the first thing you learn at Maxax. It's ethical selling.
Yeah.
It's not ram the product down their
Huckster
throat at all
nonsense.
costs. It's, are you truly a good fit for the problem they've presented?
Yeah.
Does your solution truly solve a problem?
And you
if
can
it
only
don't,
find that out through qualification.
walk the fuck away.
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of it, you'll just end up with an unhappy, pissed off.
And by the way, guys, it's important that you understand this, because unfortunately, even though you've now got this fabulous ability to generate leads, a lot of those leads will ghost you when you actually reach back out to them, and you need to have a bit of strategy in terms of follow-up in sales.
So, I'm covering this at the highest level, which is fundamentally a week-long course, but we've talked about qualification. Ask questions. They would ideally start with a who, what, why, where, or when. You don't want the prospect to be able to answer them with a yes or no.
Yeah.
Do you need paper? No. All right. I
You
guess,
sure you don't need paper?
I guess that's the end of the question. Whereas good open-ended questions would be, hey, Steve, before I can help you, I need to know everything there is to know about the business. Tell me, what do you have going on right now? And what have you got attention on in terms of when you think about the goals for the business in 2025? That's a great open-ended question to ask. Then shut up and listen so deeply and so carefully, and take notes if you have to take notes. So that would be an example of an open-ended question versus a closed question. Then there's a really important step after qualification, which is agreement on need. Agreement on, it's not good enough for you to think you heard what the customer was saying to you and the problem they were articulating. You need to play it back to them and have them confirm it back to you before you move to the next step. We call that agreement on need.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Customer, you told me that the biggest problem you've got in your business right now is returns, and that more than 25% of your products get returned because of poor packaging. Can I just be 100% clear and make sure I picked you up? Yeah, that's exactly right. Perfect. We can now move on. But you have to play back what you heard in order to make, because because if you screwed it up, if your interpretation got screwed up and you assumed, you might now go and pitch a solution that actually doesn't solve a problem that you thought you had.
Exactly.
So the next part of the process is sell the company. But before you sell the company, you've got to sell yourself, because people
Buy from people.
From people. So you've got to establish your own credibility, your own background, your own reasons why you're the expert they need to do business with, before you then present the company and why they should do business with that company. And by the way, Presenting yourself is 90% of that task, and 10% of it is pitching the company. There should be a compelling reason why they need to do this with you individually. And that's because you're positioned as an expert. You've now built the appropriate level of trust. I always remember one of the sales guys that used to work for us, CJ, he did what you were talking about earlier, Andy. He effortlessly built deep, meaningful connections with customers on the first call. Like, he was so freaking good at it. And the way that he did that is he was sincere.
Yeah.
He wasn't going, I'm deeply connecting with you in order to monetize you. He had a genuine, legitimate interest in making sure that he could successfully sell the customer something that was truly meaningful for them.
And you feed into what people really want is people want to feel like they're being heard, and people like talking about themselves. So if you let them talk about themselves and you nod and you really are interested in what they say and they feel like they've been heard, that immediately magnetically pulls you towards each other in terms of attraction. One of the biggest deals
we ever done when we asked the customer, hey, because another good question to ask is, hey, thanks a lot, really appreciate the business. What made you decide to do business with us? He told us CJ had earned the right to our business.
And it's something you said before, which is these skills are life skills. Yeah. Whether it's selling, building a business, or whether it's just connecting with your wife or your family, it's that same level of sincerity. You've got to be genuine. That's why I find I'm genuinely interested in people. I want to hear their stories. I want to know about them. And then the business is almost a byproduct in the back 100%. Of that. Yeah. Business is a byproduct of doing what you love well.
Yeah.
So you've explained who you are, why you've got credibility, why they should do it with you. You've then explained who the company is and established credibility for the business. Now you need to fill the need.
Yeah.
Now you need to explain how your product or service comprehensively solves the problems that you discovered in
that they just articulated to you in qualification.
That's the next step of the process. And so that means you need to have a compelling pitch for your product and service. And it really bloody helps if it's a good product or service and actually does solve a problem. So that part's really important. So you would then fill the need. And then finally, well, second from last, the penultimate point here is you close the deal. Yeah. This is the biggest fucking mistake in sales. The amount of sales guys I've sat next to, watched them pitch the company, pitch themselves, understand, get the qualification, and then just clam up and never ask for the order.
And the customer goes, thanks very much, I'll thanks for all that information. I'll get back to you.
Well, that was really interesting. Thanks, man. We'll get back to you. They never even ask for the order. So this is the biggest unlock in sales. You've no idea how many salespeople don't actually ask for the order. So whatever you do, at this point, you have earned the right. If you've got to this point in the process, you've earned the right to ask for the business. Now, there is a way to ask for the business that's very disarming, right? Because people are programmed. When people know it's a sales interaction, the buyer knows that you're waiting for them to say yes. And so everything in their body, everything in their psychology, everything in their makeup is resisting to say the word yes.
Yeah.
So the best way to close somebody in a very disarming way, not triggering all their visceral impulses to reject salespeople, is to close them by allowing them to say no.
The inversion process.
Yeah. And it would go something like this. Andy, are you telling me that if we could solve X, Y, Z for you and deliver it by the end of May, increase in business for you by 257% before Christmas, is there any reason you can think of why we shouldn't go ahead and get you signed up?
No.
Yeah. That's how you close the deal, by getting the customer to say no, which is 1,000 times easier for them to say
than yes.
But great guess point. What? They've agreed they're going to do business with you, and you still cannot fucking take it at this point that that's actually going to happen. There is a final and critical step here, which is cement the deal. Okay, so even though Andy's agreed to do business, we've got to double down and lock him in. And the way that we do that is we do cement the deal. And cement the deal is Andy reconfirming, you posing a pretty controversial question to Andy to get him to reconfirm that there's no circumstances
when you walk out that door that he's going to back out of this deal.
And it would sound something like, Andy, I'm really looking forward and excited to do business with you. I'm going to start mobilizing resources at our end, but I'm going to ask you one last question. Can you think of any reason why you're not going to follow through and get this done with us? Because if you can't, I'd want to deal with it right now and not in 3 weeks' time. Then you're going to force Andy to maybe blurt out an objection that he's been harbouring. You're going to force Andy to do a whole bunch of things at this point. But the most likely thing Andy's going to say is, no, I can't think of anything. We're going to go ahead.
And then because Andy said that, he's like, fuck no, I need to follow through.
Andy
and
now
do
feels under incredible pressure to follow through and deliver on his part of this.
Yeah.
Where were you guys 30 years ago when I needed to hear all of this stuff?
And of course, we never covered objection handling, all that stuff, but that's a whole...
I know, Paddy, see, when you're having the same problem I had, that what I delivered there was the most summarised version humanly possible. That could have been a 12-hour course in and of itself. By the way, go and get $100 million leads from Alex Hormozy. It breaks that down in fantastically better detail than I could ever dream of.
And go and sign up to Medic from Andy White or MedPick, the P, if you've got a large paper process as part of your business. Let's say you're in software and your deals have to go for review to legal or whatever, then there's methodologies out there. So like Andy says, go and read Alex Hormozy's books, go and listen to Andy White on Medic, but go and learn how to be a salesperson. You cannot bullshit your way through a sale, not really understanding where you are in the process and how to move it forward.
Specifically, if you're dealing with sophisticated buyers.
Correct. And
you can do some kind of basic Jedi mind tricks on the kind of average Joe off the street. But if you're dealing with people who purchase products and services for a living, you'll get found out pretty quickly if you don't have a skill set.
But going back to the basics again, the most important thing of all is go do.
Yes.
Go do.
Go do. You've been given fabulous advice today. You've got some systems on which to hook it. Try and you'll learn what works and doesn't work for you. And what's great about life is we're all different. So you start to work out your strengths, your weaknesses, the bits of you need to polish up, or the bits of you that work better, and I'll double down in those. I find crying in front of people helps all the time.
Go do it and fall in love with rejection. You're going to be rejected the overwhelming majority of the time. Understand that is the normal resting heart rate of sales and marketing outreach, and that it's entirely normal. It's not just happening to you, it happens to every freaking sales
all the best
person
things,
and marketeer in the world.
All the best things in life are sitting on the other side of your maximum fear.
There you go.
Great quote to end on.
Now, let's finish on some light subject matter to take us off.
Have you got 5 minutes to do tariffs, Paddy, before you need to bounce?
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the global apocalypse of the stock market and tariffs.
So maybe one we'll have to come back to a bit more detail, because I'm kind of mindful with
so what have we got here, Paddy? We get 5-6 minutes to blast this.
So let's talk just really quickly, and I think I'd like to come back to it next week. We're sitting here today on the edge of 3 horrendous days in the stock market.
Yeah.
We're sitting here today on just a few days after Trump's announcement of these tariffs. And I thought, again, it'd be useful just to kind of think about the bigger picture stuff again. So often when we see big changes in the world, the first thing that came to my mind was, what would have happened if nothing had happened? If last week Trump had said nothing, we didn't have Doge, we didn't have tariffs, and America just continued along the path that it was on. So as with so many things in life, sometimes doing nothing is a decision which has its own consequences. So the American debt was rising. It's already well over 100% of GDP. The cost of refinancing it, which is coming up again in a year or two's time, is getting more and more expensive. America was running towards a wall where eventually there would have been a collapse.
Yeah.
Debt would have outstripped its ability to repay it, and the markets would eventually have turned against America. The dollar would have gone down the toilet, and world trade would have collapsed in a different format.
Yeah.
So what we've seen to some extent is an attempt to cut US government debt, the country's national debt. How have they done it? Doge, which is cutting spending, tariffs, which is increasing revenues. So when you think about it that way, again, let's take the politics, the cataclysm out of it at the moment. If I was an American, I would want my government spending to go down, my government revenue to go up. And if I can get that money from someone else, not from me, because how does government revenue come in? It comes in through taxes, either against me as an individual, companies in the country, or tariffs from goods coming in from elsewhere. So to some extent, this has been a financial grab against the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So the rest of the world are paying to pay down America's debt. And one of the quotes I liked hearing today was that old one about, if you owe the bank £100, they own you. If you owe the bank £100 trillion, you own them.
Yeah.
And effectively, that's America's position. We're doing that. So there's that point, which is doing nothing was not an option.
No.
And to some extent, it's been great that they are addressing it, and probably many other countries, including our own, should. You then come to that idea of, what do governments do? How are governments made up? Why is Donald Trump exercising these powers? Never mind whether they're right or wrong. So again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but my understanding is Western democracies generally have an executive power, a legislative power, and a judiciary. 3 parts of government. One kind of puts forward the laws. The other kind of debates the laws. The third interprets the laws. And that's the checks and balances that we always have in place to keep Western governments working. So what's gone wrong here, in my opinion, is you have the executive, Donald Trump, who is using powers which actually he doesn't have, or doesn't appear to have. And that's the bit that really worries me. And I've kind of touched on that before, that it's those bumpers that keep democracies on the right lines. So the power to change tariffs comes to the president under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So it's a 1977 piece of legislation. So this is not something which is in the American Constitution. This is the right of a president in warlike situations to exact economic powers to protect the country. So the way he did this initially was to say, we have a crisis of opioids coming across the border.
Yeah.
I'm using my tariff powers to try and bring Mexico into line. That was the whole.
Yeah.
Okay, that may or may not have been correct. You could argue that. Then he extended it to say, oh, well, I'll now use it against Canada. Not so sure about that one. And of course, now we're seeing these powers being used against the rest of the world. So what we've got now is an executive who is really extending his powers beyond anything that I can see as being realistic. What's likely to happen? Well, you're going to see judicial review. So you've got already litigation. I think it's Emily Leigh Paper has raised an action which will go to the Supreme Court. But of course, the whole world's going to go to shit before we get there. And I think there's also a Senate bill which is already getting bipartisan efforts to try and again change things. But as we know, at the moment, we have a legislature, which is Congress and Senate, which has Republican majorities. And we've got a Supreme Court, which has also got a Republican or right-wing leaning and tends not to want to interfere too much about executive powers. So the bumpers are not there. And really, for most of us, I think it's going to be the midterms before we see whether or not there's any kickback.
And that's a long time away.
Which is another year and a half away.
Yeah.
So, what do we think of the timeline here? Are these short-term lived measures that then get walked back? Is it like the madman with the gun's got to shoot somebody first to convince somebody that he's actually a madman and he
Capable
might shoot
of
the other
murder.
20
Yeah.
hostages? So is this we had to do it to prove that we will do it if we need to do it? We walk it all back now, or form an orderly queue, and then we agree free trade deals?
I think the problem is, and again, let's not even worry about mad or not mad. I'm not sure if there is a madness here. I think what we're seeing is what happens. The world wanted change. We're all tired of left and right and things not working. We all wanted things. We see that the problem with slow legislative powers, oversight, regulation. So we've instead of saying we need to take these things back, we've kind of thrown them away, in my opinion, in a lot of the American case. So we're trying to do we're trying to make the Titanic do a U-turn.
Yeah.
The Titanic doesn't do U-turns. Something else is, but rather than hitting the iceberg, what's going to happen is we're going to rip the ship in half anyway because it can't turn this fast. So I think that's the problem. Will it work out?
Okay,
Time will
60
tell.
second round the horn predictions. I'm going to go first. Scott Besson, best interview yet. He's the guy that's drone piloting Trump financially behind the scenes, widely regarded as the world's best international investor, so on and so forth. He described tariffs as a melting ice cube. So in the short term, tariffs are there to raise income whilst you change behaviour. So the idea is you put the tariffs on all these countries, but the long-term strategy is to onshore manufacturing back to America again. And in the meantime, you get the tariff income. And then as the companies onshore back to America, you get less tariff income, but it gets replaced
Makes no
with
sense.
gross domestic production with all of these new companies and factories that are getting built in America and staffed with people and robots.
That makes no sense. The tariffs are not there because of trade. They're not there as a trade imbalance is not the issue. There are some of these countries which tariffs are going against create products that either America can't make, diamonds, or it makes products that America doesn't want, which is dirty copper, or it makes products which ultimately, bringing it back to America, won't necessarily change employment because chip manufacture or car manufacture even is now largely an automated process.
So what's your prediction? My prediction is before episode 17 of the Roundtable Rethink podcast, this is over.
So that's
tariffs have been dropped. Countries have all the major countries have done trade deals or free deals with America. Stock market rose back. This is all over in 4 weeks' time.
I think that's possible. I think what it will have done, if that does happen, is it will have damaged relationships.
For sure.
So I actually would see, no matter what happens, I could see Europe again stacking itself up better. Britain moving closer towards Europe because we're going to have to. And I could see us all moving closer towards China because China is being seen now as the reliable trading partner.
Yeah.
And that's, who would have thought that?
Paddy, wind us
3
up.
months ago.
What are you saying?
I agree with the prediction. I think it will happen even sooner than 4 weeks. I think it could happen in the next fortnight. I think they walk all this back with the exception of China, who they leave on the tariffs. And it's fundamentally been used as a tool to get people to form an orderly queue and put real urgency into free, fair trade agreements with every country.
But there are free, fair trade agreements with every country at the moment. There are no.
I don't.
It's the
That's
non-trade
true.
barriers, Stephen. That is the biggest. It's not the tariff. The tariff is the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg under the water is the non-trade, the non-tariff barriers that these countries put on to stop us to stop America from accessing their markets.
I think they could have went another way about it. I don't think tariff in the whole world
No,
was necessary.
me either.
I think America's got sufficient clout, power, and the American consumer's so strong they could just have instructed, and I think had instructed some governments around the world to start working on new trade agreements that were more advantageous for the Americans. And I think they would have all formed a queue and done it anyhow. I think he had to do the tariffs because he said he was going to do the tariffs. And so if he never, he wouldn't be following through on one of the pledges. That
Very quickly, I listened to Scott Galloway, who, again, love his podcast. So this is simply me repeating what I heard from him, which was that Trump's people went out, looked at all of the inequalities, of which there were very few, came back with various suggestions about how this could be done, to which they were simply disregarded. And then you end up with this silly, colour-coded map with a fabulous looking calculation. So ultimately, this has got no sense to any of it. And
but what's your prediction?
I told you, I think there will be a stepping back, whether it's a stepping back in whole or in part, but ultimately it will have broken more than it has fixed.
Okay.
With the real danger, right? So if you took this to its conclusion, the geopolitical parts of this are way more difficult to solve than the financial parts.
Yeah.
You walk the deals back, you create new deals, done. You've solved the financial problem this creates. The geopolitics, I don't know if it ever gets fixed.
There's
I think
much enmity.
Here's the danger, right? The danger is we isolate China so much. I'm actually reading the news right now, and there's a threat of additional 50% tariffs on China right now if they don't remove their retaliatory. So here's the doomsday scenario. You isolate China so much, and you disenfranchise it so much with your export controls and tariffs and everything else, where they literally go, well, fuck it.
You escalate to a kinetic war. That's the end state.
Well,
They go, fuck it, we're going to take Taiwan. We're going to take control of Taiwan. We're going to control the flow of semiconductors in the world.
and you escalate to a kinetic war.
But think about what is the purpose of all this. The purpose of all of this, and again, this is the right of every government to self-determine, is effectively a grab of money to benefit the US citizen.
Yeah.
I can absolutely appreciate that. But they're doing it at the cost of everyone else in the world. We want to take money from your pocket. Now, if there are inequalities, you're absolutely right. These need to be discussed. But no one can say that America as a superpower is economically disadvantaged in any trade. It's quite capable of renegotiating with anyone on anything.
Yeah.
The tariffs have been a really blunt stick, I think.
It's created so much enmity and hatred towards them the world over. I mean, it's mental how hated they are right now.
Hate maybe is quite a
I don't mean the
strong word.
American people. I mean this current administration. If you look at the stuff coming out of France, the stuff coming out of UK, I mean, there's real enmity towards the administration just now because they've not allowed anybody to react. They've just put this on as a cash grab, and they're breaking countries in the process.
They are making us all feel uncomfortable and uncertain. Nothing wrong with that. Life is all about uncomfort and uncertainties. I think it's back down to this idea of, it's back to what I said at the beginning. There's a reasons why they've done it. I can understand those. The execution of this has been horrendously bad on every level.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for the vast majority of, a big percentage of Americans, they must also be saying to themselves, what's this all about? Why is my...
When I listen to Besant and Lutnick in long form, you understand there's a strategy here. They're trying to execute on a strategy. But the way it's being communicated in public is diabolical.
Yeah.
And so...
The bombastic,
But listen, it's make America great again. It's not make Vietnam great again. So, I mean, like I say, if you're an American citizen in America and you're hearing about potentially all these factories,
The trillions of dollars worth of onshoring.
I don't know if you hate any of this.
The other thing about it is always unintended consequences. Think about it for Britain. We may well become the benefit of a vast inflow of cheap Chinese goods, which they cannot now sell to America.
Offer us a 51st state.
We'll take
it.
We may end up with effectively trade benefits, because if we're only in a 10% tariff and other parts of Europe or the world are on higher tariffs, our goods become cheaper in relative terms.
It's like the school bully who smashes the face in of the school nerd and then demands that the nerd thank him for smashing his face in and then apologise for everything bad that he ever did.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see how our predictions turn out in the next 2 to 4
Episode
weeks.
13.
Is this 13
Is
or
it
14?
13?
Oh,
Oh,
no
Christ,
idea.
I
Must
don't
be,
know.
yes, could be.
13.
Yes.
Unlucky for
Episode
someone.
Unlucky for some.
13 in the can. There you have it, folks. Don't forget to like, to subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. If you're a good friend and a good family member, then pass it on to your
Share
network.
it.
Please
Share.
Please, please, please.
Warm outreach to your warm audience.
Please go to the website, roundtablerethink.com. All right, we're out of here. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye, guys.